Okay, so I have a question for you today, and I really want you to be totally honest with yourself for a second here.
Oh boy, setting the stakes high right out of the gate.
I am. Because, well, when you look in the mirror in the morning, or, when you're just stuck in traffic trying to decide what to have for lunch, do you think of yourself as a computer made of meat?
A computer made of meat. That is certainly a vivid and honestly slightly unsettling image to kick things off with.
It is gross, right? I mean, it just sounds terrible.
Yeah,
But it's actually the prevailing theory for like a massive portion of the modern world.
right. It's the standard model.
Yeah, it's just a whole concept of materialism, the idea that physics and chemistry can explain absolutely everything about us, like our thoughts, our loves, our anxieties, our choices. They're nothing more than neurons firing.
Just electrical sparks in a wet biological machine.
Exactly. Basically, that we are just hardware running software.
And that is exactly the scientific model most of us have grown up with. It essentially suggests that the mind is simply what the brain does.
Right.
In the exact same way that the liver secretes bile or the heart pumps blood, the brain secretes thought. So the logic follows, if you damage the hardware, you damage the software. End of story. There's no separate you in there.
Just the hum of the machine.
Just the machine.
But, and here's where it gets really, really interesting. We have a stack of sources today that are basically saying, not so fast.
A very compelling stack of sources.
Yeah. We've been digging into transcripts and writings from Dr. Michael Egnor, who is a prominent neurosurgeon, and J.P. Moreland, a philosopher. And they are arguing something that sounds, well, almost impossible in the 21st century.
They're arguing that the latest neuroscience actually proves the exact opposite of the materialist view.
Right. Which is wild to think about.
It is. They're saying that the evidence, and we are talking about hard clinical data from the operating room here, not just philosophical wishful thinking, suggests that the mind and the brain are actually two completely different things.
Like they interact, obviously. They're deeply connected.
Deeply connected, yes,
Yeah.
but they are not the same entity.
It's the classic ghost in the machine argument. But this time, the ghost actually has medical charts to back it up.
Precisely. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack what they call the enigma of the mind. We're going to look at three main pillars of evidence from these sources.
Which are all fascinating.
We'll start by looking at what happens when massive amounts of the physical brain are just missing, but the person is completely fine. Then we'll look at the bizarre medical mystery of split brain patients.
That part blew my mind. Pun intended.
And finally, we will dive into the phenomenon of near-death experiences, but specifically those happening under highly controlled, monitored surgical conditions.
I am so ready to get into this. It really feels like we're trying to find the soul with a scalpel today. So let's start with the hardware itself. Dr. Egnor uses this analogy of a laptop that I found just incredibly helpful for visualizing this.
It's a great starting point. So imagine you have a laptop sitting on your desk. It's working perfectly, it's running complex programs, it's streaming high-definition video, doing heavy math, whatever you need it to do. But then you unscrew the back case, open it up, and you realize that literally 2/3 of the internal electronics are just missing.
I'd be totally freaked out. I mean, you'd assume it was a magic trick or that the video was being streamed from a server somewhere else.
Exactly. You would immediately assume that the actual computing, the intelligence of the system, wasn't entirely originating inside that plastic box.
Right.
And Egnor points to specific medical cases to illustrate this in humans. He talks about conditions called hydrocephaly and hydranencephaly.
Which are, just to clarify, conditions where there's a significant fluid buildup inside the cranium. Right.
Yes, exactly. Cerebrospinal fluid builds up, often compressing or even completely destroying the brain tissue over time.
And we aren't talking about like a minor injury here or a small concussion. I was reading the case study in the sources of a young woman Dr. Egnor actually treated. She was born with about 2/3 of her brain entirely missing. It was mostly just spinal fluid in her skull.
Yes. Now, if we strictly apply the materialist view, the view that the physical brain creates the mind the way a factory manufactures a product, well, if you destroy 2/3 of the factory, production should grind to a halt.
She should have been in a vegetative state.
At best, she should have been severely cognitively impaired. But she wasn't.
Not at all.
Far from it. She was a bright, perfectly functioning human being. She had a master's degree in English literature, actually.
Which is just crazy.
And she was a polished musician. She had a rich interior life, complex reasoning skills, and a fully formed personality.
With two-thirds of the hardware completely gone, it doesn't compute. It's like trying to run a high-end gaming PC on a cheap pocket calculator.
It breaks the established rules of the materialist model.
And then there's the even more extreme case that Egnor mentions, the boy with hydranencephaly.
That is a heartbreaking but scientifically profound condition. In these specific cases, the child is often missing both hemispheres of the brain entirely.
Completely gone.
Completely. They essentially only have a brainstem. Now, the brainstem is basically the body's autopilot. It keeps the autonomic functions going.
Like breathing, heart rate, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But they have no cerebral cortex whatsoever.
And the cortex is where the quote-unquote me is supposed to live, right? That's the thinking part, the hard drive.
According to standard neurological theory, yes. The cortex is the seat of consciousness. Without it, strictly speaking, you shouldn't be conscious. You shouldn't have a personality.
Yet, Egnor describes this boy who could laugh, who could cry, and who showed distinct emotional responses.
He recognized people around him. He showed a clear preference for his mother over strangers. He was, by all clinical definitions, a conscious, present human being.
So, if the physical brain is what creates the mind, how are these people functioning? If the machine is fundamentally broken, where is the signal coming from?
This is exactly where Egnor makes a critical distinction, and it really frames this entire conversation today. He isn't saying the brain does nothing. That would be absurd.
Right, obviously the brain matters.
He argues that the brain is an organ of processing. It handles movement, it stores data like memory, it processes sensory input from your eyes and ears. Those are physical organ functions.
Okay.
But he argues that it is not the actual source of abstract intellect or reason, or what philosophers call the will.
Let's unpack that a bit. So the brain is it like a transceiver, like an antenna on a car?
In a way, yes. Think of it like this. If your physical eyes are damaged, you can't see.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that you, the conscious observer inside, have suddenly stopped existing. It just means the interface is broken.
Ah, the interface. I like that.
The brain is the interface between the immaterial mind and the physical world. So when the interface is damaged, the signal gets garbled or lost.
Yeah.
But the source of that signal, the abstract mind itself, remains intact.
That distinction between just processing data and actually reasoning is huge. And this actually leads us right into the second pillar from the sources, which is the work of Wilder Penfield.
Yes.
Because this guy sounds like a total pioneer in the field.
He really was. Penfield is considered the father of modern neurosurgery. Back in the mid-20th century, he pioneered and performed what is known as awake brain surgery.
Which is exactly what it sounds like, and honestly terrifying.
It sounds barbaric to modern ears, but it was absolutely necessary at the time. The brain itself actually feels no pain. It has no pain receptors.
Right.
So using local anesthesia just for the scalp, Penfield could keep his patients completely awake and talking while he operated. He needed to do this to map out the brain, to make sure he wasn't accidentally cutting into vital areas responsible for speech or motor control.
So just imagine that situation. We're lying there on the operating table, chatting with your doctor about the weather, and he's literally zapping your exposed brain with an electrode.
It's incredible. And he would use a small electrical probe to stimulate different parts of the cortex to see what would happen. And the results were incredibly consistent.
What kind of results?
Penfield found that he could stimulate a specific spot and make a patient's arm raise up involuntarily. He could poke another spot and make them see a sudden flash of light or hear a buzzing sound.
Wow.
He could even trigger a vivid, fully formed memory, like a patient would suddenly smell burnt toast or hear a specific song playing from their childhood.
So he could basically play the brain like a piano, push a physical key, get a physical response.
To a certain extent, yes. But here is the critical finding. The thing Penfield realized after decades of doing these surgeries, no matter where he probed and no matter how much electricity he used, he could never force a patient to have an abstract thought.
What do you mean by abstract in this context?
I mean, he couldn't zap a spot on the cortex and make the patient suddenly do calculus. He couldn't stimulate the brain to force a moral judgment or make them contemplate the nature of justice or truth.
That is fascinating.
He could trigger raw data movement, sensation, old memories, but he could never trigger intellect. He couldn't force them to believe something.
And there's that specific anecdote in the notes that really hammered this home for me, the I didn't do that moment.
Right, this is a crucial piece of evidence. Penfield would stimulate the motor cortex, and the patient's hand would jerk upward involuntarily.
Okay.
Penfield would then ask the patient, "Why did you do that?" And the patient would immediately use their other hand to grab the moving arm, try to
Yeah.
pull it down, and they would say, "I didn't do that. You did."
That actually gives me chills.
It should,
Yeah.
because it implies that there were literally two distinct wills in the room at that moment.
Right.
There is the electrical impulse forcing the biological machine, the arm, to move, and then there is the patient's conscious self, observing the movement, judging it, and recognizing this action is not originating from me.
It really is the difference between the driver and the car. You can hack the car's computer to make the windshield wipers go off, but the driver's sitting there going, hey, I didn't push that button. Stop that.
Exactly. And Penfield actually started his career as a staunch materialist, thinking the mind was all just physical wiring. But by the end of his career, after thousands of these surgeries, he concluded that the will, the thing that decides, the thing that observes, stands completely apart from the biological machine.
Because he couldn't poke the will.
You couldn't poke the will.
Okay, so we can't poke free will with an electrode. But what happens if we take a scalpel and literally cut the brain in half? Because this brings us to the third big piece of evidence. The split brain experiments, which honestly sound like straight-up science fiction.
They do. This refers to a procedure called a corpus callosotomy. It's a radical surgery that is sometimes used as a last resort for patients with severe, life-threatening epilepsy.
And they cut the corpus callosum.
Right, which is the massive bridge of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. They sever it so the electrical storm of a seizure can't spread from one side to the other.
So neurologically speaking, you now have two disconnected islands inside one skull. The left side literally doesn't know what the right side is doing.
Correct, physically.
Yeah.
And according to strict materialism, if you split the hardware down the middle, you should split the software.
You get two minds.
You should effectively create two people, or at the very least, a deeply fractured consciousness. There should be two selves operating independently.
And that's not what happens.
No. The patients remain one unified person. They have one continuous personality. They don't feel like two people trapped in one body.
Which is already crazy.
But the experiments done on these patients reveal something even more profound about how we handle abstract concepts.
This is the experiment with the violin, right? I want to make sure I get this set up right because it's a bit of a brain twister.
Yes. This was conducted by a researcher named Alice Cronin. And it's brilliant in its simplicity. She set up a testing apparatus where she could show visual images to only one hemisphere of the brain at a time.
Because the brain is cross-wired, right?
Exactly. The visual input from the left eye is processed by the right hemisphere, and vice versa.
Okay, so she shows one side of the brain, let's say the left eye, a picture of a painter's palette.
Right. And to the other side, the completely disconnected side, she shows three different images: a violin, a toilet plunger, and a light bulb. Then she asks the patient to point to the image that matches the palette.
Now remember, the two sides of the brain cannot talk to each other physically anymore. The wire is cut. The visual data of the palette is stuck in one hemisphere, and the violin is stuck in the other.
Exactly. So theoretically, the side of the brain controlling the hand to point at the violin shouldn't have any idea that the other side just saw a painter's palette.
But the patient successfully matches the palette to the violin.
Yes.
Why? How?
When asked why they made that match, the patient explains it's because they're both art.
Wait, hold on. If the two physical sides can't talk and the wiring is definitively cut, how does the left hand know that the right eye saw something related to the concept of art?
That is the paradox that challenges materialism. The raw visual data was split. The physical hardware was disconnected. But the concept of art, the abstract idea that logically links a painter's palette and a violin, was not split.
That is the big aha moment for me in all this research.
It suggests that abstract thought understanding, what things fundamentally are, not just visually recognizing their shape, happens somewhere outside the physical wiring. The brain sees the distinct physical objects, but the mind understands the conceptual connection.
It's like the concept of art is floating in the cloud and the brain is just the device downloading it. If you cut the Ethernet cable between two desktop computers, they can't talk to each other directly, but they can both still access the exact same Wi-Fi network.
It is a very modern way to put it, but yes, it's a great analogy. It points again to the central idea that high-level reasoning is immaterial. It is not bound by the physical connections of the tissue. If the mind were just the physical wiring, cutting the wiring should break the concept completely.
But it didn't.
It didn't.
Speaking of modern analogies, we really have to talk about AI for a second. Because if we are just meat computers, as the materialists say, then a silicon computer should eventually become conscious, right? That's the big fear, or the big hope, depending on who you ask in tech right now.
That is the trillion-dollar question in Silicon Valley. But Dr. Agnor and J.P. Moreland argue that there's a fundamental, unbridgeable difference between computation and thought. And they use the analogy of the sundial to explain it.
Okay, lay the sundial on me.
A sundial tells time. You look at where the shadow falls on the stone, and you know it's 2 p.m. But does the sundial itself know that it's 2 p.m.?
No, it's a rock with a stick on it. It's just passively casting a shadow based on the sun's position.
Okay, now take a Rolex watch. Incredible feat of engineering. Tiny gears, springs, flawless precision. Does the Rolex know what time it is?
No, it's just moving little metal hands based on physical tension.
Right. Now take a massive supercomputer. It is processing billions of bits of data every second. It's doing complex math infinitely faster than any human ever could. But does the computer know what that data actually means?
It just processes ones and zeros.
Ignore argues? No, doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
It is just a very, very fancy sundial.
And this is what the philosophers call aboutness, right?
Yes, or intentionality is the formal term in philosophy. Physical matter atoms, electrons, chemical reactions isn't about anything. A chemical reaction bubbling in a beaker isn't about the French Revolution. It just is. It's just raw physics playing out.
But your thoughts are always about something. You think about your lunch, you worry about the news. We're thinking about this conversation right now.
Precisely. Because thoughts have this intrinsic quality of aboutness, and physical matter completely lacks that quality. Thoughts cannot just be matter. You cannot get meaning out of just molecules.
Wow.
And this connects back to free will in a really interesting way. There was a famous neuroscience study by Benjamin Libet that materialists absolutely love to quote.
I think I've heard of this one.
Libet showed that the brain actually preps a physical action like getting ready to move a finger milliseconds before you are consciously aware of deciding to move it.
Right. People say this proves we're just biological puppets. Like our physical brain decides what to do, and then a split second later, we just trick ourselves into thinking we made the choice consciously.
Exactly. But they almost always leave out the second half of Libet's actual findings. He found that while the physical brain might prep the action automatically, the conscious mind retains the absolute power to stop it before it happens. He famously called it free won't.
Free won't. I really like that.
The brain offers up a chemical suggestion. Eat that second piece of cake or hit that person who just insulted you. But the mind has the ultimate veto power. No, I'm on a diet. No, I am not a violent person.
The machine suggests, but the soul decides.
Yes. The brain is the engine revving, but you are the one sitting there with your foot on the brake.
Okay, so we've looked at the brain processing data. We've looked at the mind deciding and vetoing. Now let's look at what happens when they separate completely.
The most compelling evidence of all.
We're going to talk about the standstill operation, because this part of the source material was honestly the most shocking to me.
This centers around the case of Pam Reynolds. It is widely considered by researchers to be the most rigorously documented near-death experience, or NDE, in human history.
Because it didn't just happen randomly.
Right. It didn't happen alone in a bedroom or on the side of the road after a car crash. It happened during a highly monitored, strictly controlled neurosurgical procedure in 1991.
So this wasn't someone who was just like a little groggy from anesthesia.
Extremely controlled. Pam had a giant, life-threatening aneurysm deep in her brain. To fix it safely, her surgeon, Dr. Robert Spetzler, who is one of the best in the world at this, had to perform a radical procedure called hypothermic cardiac arrest.
Which again sounds absolutely terrifying.
They systematically cooled her core body temperature down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They intentionally stopped her heart. And crucially for our discussion, they entirely drained the blood from her head.
So clinically speaking, she is dead at this point.
She was clinically dead. She had 0 brain waves. The EEG monitors were completely flat. The monitors attached to her brainstem showed absolutely no activity. Her eyes were physically taped shut, and she had custom-molded clicking devices inserted into her ears to constantly monitor brainstem response.
Wow.
From a strict materialist perspective, there's absolutely no physical way consciousness could exist in that state. You have quite literally pulled the plug on the computer.
But Pam didn't just fade to black.
No. She reported popping out of her physical body. She described floating up near the ceiling of the operating room and watching the surgery happen below her.
And this is exactly where the skeptics usually jump in and say, oh, come on, it's just a hallucination. It's just the brain dumping massive amounts of chemicals as it dies in a panic.
That is always the standard scientific rebuttal. But hallucinations are dreamlike. They usually lack specific, verifiable technical details. Pam, from her vantage point looking down, accurately described the highly specialized surgical saw the doctor was using to open her skull.
Which she couldn't have seen beforehand.
She said it looked like an electric toothbrush, and she noted that it came in a specific custom case with interchangeable blades.
Had she ever seen it before the surgery?
Never. The saw was kept hidden in its sterile packaging until well after she was fully under anesthesia and her eyes were taped shut.
That's crazy.
And she also heard a very specific sound. Pam was a trained musician, and she described hearing a distinct natural D note coming from the motor of the bone saw. Later on, researchers actually checked the acoustic frequency of that specific pneumatic saw. It was a perfect natural D.
That is just incredibly specific. You don't hallucinate the exact pitch of a surgical tool you've never seen while you have zero brainwaves?
It gets even more interesting from a research perspective. Egnor points out a fascinating pattern in these documented NDE cases. When people have these experiences, they very often describe traveling through some kind of tunnel and meeting people on the other side.
Right, the classic light at the end of the tunnel story.
But there is a strict rule that seems to hold up across thousands of verified clinical cases. They only ever meet the dead.
What do you mean by that?
Think about it. In typical hallucinations like fever dreams or drug trips, you see living people all the time. You hallucinate your mom, your spouse, your friends from work. But in genuine NDEs, people exclusively report seeing deceased relatives. Pam met her grandmother and her uncle, both of whom had passed away years before.
Okay, that's a really interesting distinction.
Ignor mentions another chilling case about a young boy in a severe car crash who had an NDE and reported seeing his sister waiting for him in the light.
Oh.
But the boy didn't actually know his sister had died. She had been killed in the exact same crash just hours earlier, but he was in a coma and no one had told him yet. He only found out the truth after he woke up.
Wow, that makes the whole "it's just a hallucination" theory so much harder to hold on to, because if it's just your dying brain firing off random comforting memories, you would fully expect to see the living people you rely on every single day.
Exactly. So look at what we have here. We have a woman with a completely drained brain, zero electrical activity, accurately observing the room's technical details and interacting exclusively with the deceased. Ignor argues this is profound experimental evidence that the mind is not physically dependent on the brain to exist. It strongly suggests the mind can actually detach.
It is the ultimate, the laptop is broken, but the user is still sitting there scenario.
The biological machine was turned entirely off. But the signal, Pam's consciousness, was still broadcasting loud and clear.
So if we have all of this evidence stacked up, we've got the hydrocephaly cases functioning normally, the split brains maintaining one concept of art, the verified NDEs with zero brainwaves. Why is the "we are just computers" idea still so incredibly popular? Why does every high school biology textbook still say we are just meat machines?
It really comes down to a stubborn philosophy that Egnor and Moreland call promissory materialism.
Promissory materialism, what exactly does that mean?
It's basically a philosophical IOU issued by the scientific community. It's the pervasive idea of, well, we don't know exactly how the physical brain creates the immaterial mind yet, but just trust us. Science will definitely figure it out eventually. It is a massive check written against future unproven discoveries.
Ah, so it's like we promise to have a material answer later, so just ignore all these glaring holes in the theory for now.
Right. It relies on faith, not current science. And Dr. Ignor's response to this is just fantastic. He basically says, call me when you actually have the evidence.
Fair enough.
He argues that we shouldn't base our entire understanding of human nature on a vague promise that completely contradicts the clinical data we currently possess. We have to be brave enough to go where the data leads, even if it leads us away from comfortable materialism.
So, to wrap all this up, what is the big picture here from these sources? If we aren't just meat computers running chemical software, what actually are we?
The sources suggest that we are a hybrid. We are an interface of two distinct things. We clearly have a physical brain that handles the mechanics of life movement, emotion, raw sensation, memory storage. It anchors us in the physical world.
Right.
But we also possess a mind, or a soul, that handles abstract logic, deep reason, and genuine free will.
So we are essentially citizens of two totally different worlds at the same time. Matter and spirit.
And the physical brain is simply the biological mechanism that allows the mind to manifest in this reality. Dr. Sam Parpernia, who is another leading researcher who studies resuscitation, uses a great analogy of a television set receiving a broadcast signal.
Oh, that TV set analogy really stuck with me from the reading. You can smash the TV screen, you can break the internal antenna, and the picture on the screen will get distorted or disappear entirely.
But the invisible signal itself is still there in the room, unharmed.
That is just a massive amount to process, but honestly, it's surprisingly hopeful, isn't it? It means we aren't just a series of chemical reactions eventually fizzling out into nothing.
It fundamentally restores a sense of human agency. If you are not just a programmed machine, then your choices actually matter. You aren't just blindly following genetic code, you are actively writing it. You aren't just a passive passenger in the vehicle of your body, you are the driver.
I absolutely love that. So here's our final challenge to you, the listener, as we wrap up this deep dive. As you go about your day today, try to catch yourself in the act of thinking.
Pay attention to the process, yeah.
Yeah. When you actively decide to grab that second cup of coffee, or when you use your free won't to veto that angry text message you were just about to send, take a second and ask yourself, who is actually doing that?
Are you simply your firing neurons? Or are you the unseen observer watching those neurons fire?
Dive into your own consciousness today and see what you find in there. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Stay curious.